Welcome to another great episode of Beyond the Score podcast. We got some really fun things to bring you guys today. Josh, what do we got talking today, huh?
Good evening to you, Mr. Harold.
Good evening to you too, sir. Well, you can call me Harold. You're probably one of the only people that could call me Harold, but...
And I'm also probably one of the only people that will. But anyway, today we got some good stuff as always. But I just wanted to say what's up. Welcome back to our repeat listeners and to the new people. We're happy to have you on board.
We got some baseball to discuss, right? Trade deadline just passed, so we want to discuss some winners and losers of what just happened. Trade deadline was Tuesday at 6 p.m. Teams were rolling in last second, 11th hour, trying to make some moves happen to bolster up their rosters. And a lot of teams made some moves happen. Some of the better teams, obviously some of the worst teams in the league had to offset some of their best players, and they got a lot of prospects in return. Josh, who was the biggest winner in your eyes for this trade deadline?
Yeah, I mean, my two biggest winners are actually two people that made a trade with each other, but you can't say anyone but the Padres are the winner because they got Tanner Scott. They're in such a great position to have a super bullpen, and they're going to be a very dangerous team once playoffs come around. I think you look at that team top to bottom, they got guys that could play multiple positions all over. I think that they're benefiting a lot from a former number one prospect in Jurickson Profar breaking out in a big way and kind of filling that role that Tatis was expected to be, as being someone to take some load off Machado. And also, I mean, you can say Luis Ariz. I know that wasn't the deadline, but if you want to see the teams that made the best trades, it's the Padres. What do you think?
I don't have them on my list, but I'd have to agree in the aspect that they were one of the teams that were a lot more aggressive all in all, not only at the deadline. Obviously, getting Arias was a huge pickup, someone who hits singles and gets you on base left and right. But Tanner Scott was the best reliever or closer that was actually moved at the deadline. You know, there was some chirping that Mason Miller might get moved, but then, you know, the injury sparked and that kind of dwindled things down. It was going to be a tough move regardless to get Mason Miller away from Oakland, unless, you know, Spencer Jones or someone of that caliber was getting moved. But San Diego has made some moves, right? And I think, you know, considering that in the offseason they traded one of their best players, Soto, they moved him, and, you know, people were probably thinking, you know, what's happening in San Diego? They have so many other stars. Are they going to be able to compete with a team like the Dodgers, right, in that division? Even the Giants, who made some splashes trying to get back into the playoff picture. But San Diego definitely made some big moves. I wouldn't call them my biggest winner. I think actually the Dodgers probably did a lot more, at least specifically in terms of deadline approach, right? They got some great arms, as well as just overall, you know, talent-wise, they were able to, you know, lock up Jack Flaherty, right? Last second, that was a big move. Stealing
The rich
away
get
from
richer.
Detroit. Yeah, you know,
we
we could focus on Jack Flaherty a little bit because the Yankees were also interested last second, but unfortunately they couldn't strike a deal. Considering the fact that he's got some injury problems in the past, he's obviously figured it out this season, right? He's pitching great. He's got like a 2.95 ERA, but they also got Ahmed Rosario, Michael Kopech, Tommy Edman, another great player they took away from St. Louis. Mm-hmm. So they made some pretty big moves, and you know, jumping off from there, one of the losers would be the White Sox for me, right? They dished out Michael Kopech and a lot of other prospects, but the return that they should have got at least wasn't really where it was, right? I think when you're dealing off some of your best assets, and now I understand the White Sox are probably the worst team we've seen in the last 15 years in baseball, worse than those 2019, 2018 Baltimore Orioles that were winning like
worse than last year's A's, you think? I think they're worse than last year's A's.
I mean, at this rate, they have two 15-plus losing streaks on the season. They're like, what, 28 and 83 or something like that, if I'm not mistaken, in that ballpark of a record. I mean, they are horrible, right?
I mean, you're not wrong about that, but hit us in the comments. What do you think? You think that the A's last year or the White Sox this year are worse? Let us know.
My opinion, I'm going to stick with the White Sox. I mean, the A's were horrible last season. They're horrible again this season, right? But when you look at what the White Sox were trying to do, at least, right, was to get rid of some of these guys. Eric Fed was another player that they traded, and They got some mid-tier prospects. They got Miguel Vargas from the Dodgers as well, which was probably the best player they've gotten in terms of what their haul was. So I have to put them as
Which
a
is sad.
loser. But the Dodgers really they picked and they got a lot of great talent. They bolstered a team that was already really, really bolstered up. It's easy to say the Dodgers because of these moves, but another team that I actually want to discuss that probably wouldn't be on a lot of people's radars for a winner would be the Marlins, right? I mean, they knew that they were going to be sellers at the deadline, and they got rid of some players. Jazz was one of their better players that they ended up moving. Tanner Scott was another player that they ended up moving, but they got a really nice haul in return for these guys, right? I mean, we're talking about prospects that are, Snelling, Norby, Davison De Los Santos, some pretty good prospects that they were able to return for Miami. And they have one of the best, prospects in baseball in terms of the farm and the organization itself. So I think for them, I'd have to give them a winner. I think, they're setting themselves up for future, and hopefully they could turn around as an organization and, maybe make the
Yeah, I
playoffs
mean,
in the near future. But
I
I
mean,
would say that, I don't want to give the Dodgers as the number one winner. I'd have to go with the Marlins just because they knew where they were. They weren't one of those indecisive teams that were like, we don't know where we stand, right? I mean, it's easy to say when their record is as bad as it is in the division that they are in, but some teams they get a little, gun shy when it comes to making these moves. They don't want to just get rid of these assets and not have a legitimate short-term future, right? But the Marlins knew they had no short-term future. They have to build for the farther future. I mean, baseball is one of those sports where they can easily take off depending on how well their prospects are and how well they're able to get them to the next level. But in
yeah, I
terms
mean,
of
the
the
people were most excited. People were most excited about Will Smith and Martin Lawrence when we went to the game there. So that kind of tells you about the state of baseball in Miami right now. I had the Marlins as a winner also. I had the Padres and the Marlins in that trade with each other as the two winners. And I do think the Dodgers did well. I didn't have them as my top two. I kind of did top two and bottom two. But I think that the Marlins did really well positioning themselves, like you said. I mean, Robbie Snelling has very much upside. I think that they got a lot of good guys. And I also think that the White Sox were my top loser. But I think a very important piece that has to be mentioned is that Garrett Crochet, Luis Robert. I never know how anyone pronounces that, but Luis Robert, I'm gonna say.
I've never heard
Actually,
anyone call him Robert. I just wanted to make that clear. I was always under the impression it was Luis Robert Jr.
all right, Luis Robert. We'll go Luis Robert, whatever. But but Luis Robert and Garrett Crochet, like they could have turned their future around with these two guys. I know Garrett Crochet kind of shot them in the foot by saying I need an extension to be traded because pitching in the playoffs would be more innings than I ever pitched. Like that's very controversial for me because if you go to the playoffs, you might never go back. So if you get that opportunity, I feel like you put a lot on the line. I mean, yeah, you definitely want to get in your bag, maybe like get one extra year, maybe you just want, but I think it's important to find a home over anything. I know that like you want to get that fat check, but it's millions of dollars that you're dealing with. And I think that they really fumbled the bag with that and with Robert because I think that he has upside, but I don't think that you could look at Tim Anderson as a good example that they held him too long. He completely destroyed his value and he may never be the same. I mean, Robert definitely always had more upside. And I think that everyone looks at him as like a light version of Mike Trout, including the injuries, unfortunately. And my other loser is the Twins because I feel like they really fumbled on um, expanding on their roster because I feel like they have some moves that they needed to make. I mean, I know that they were so caught up on their payroll in terms of trying to cut it or trying to build, and I think they just got in their own way and they barely made any moves if they even made any on the last day. And I think that they really fumbled the bag because they have a good core. They need vets. They need guys who are gonna push them that have been there that are gonna show them the way.
I mean, I think it's funny because we haven't discussed our list, but we have such a similar mindset when it comes to baseball that I actually also have the Twins as one of my losers too. The reason being is since April 22nd, they've had the best record in the American League, 51-35, and the only move they made was snagging Trevor Richards away from the Blue Jays, someone
Oh,
who's
that's right.
not
That's right.
a high caliber reliever. But when you're in a division and you have the Guardians also in there too, and you have the Royals now, this AL Central is a lot more competitive. You got to go out there and make those moves. You can't worry about the payroll. You could take on somebody who's a 2-month rental potentially and see where things go in the offseason, right? And I just also wanted to go back to the whole Garrett Crochet thing at the White Sox. Do you think it was potentially a move, right, for him to say, well, I'm going to say this, and it's going to make my trade value much more difficult in terms of moving me because he wants to keep that power in him to be able to make those decisions potentially in the offseason, working on a trade instead of kind of getting flipped at the deadline to the team that, spends the most or gives the most in terms of getting him. I think it could have been a way for him to kind of get out of getting moved. Now, I understand that they're such a bad team, and if he got moved to a better team and he'd have an opportunity to pitch in the playoffs, but the truth is, nothing is guaranteed in our sports world. So when I see a comment like that, I have to think, wait a minute. Is he saying this because there's a reason, whether he wants to get moved? I mean, it's the White Sox. It's a big market, Chicago, right? You have the Cubs on the other side too. But, you kind of expect that when it's the White Sox, eventually they're going to figure out a way to spend the money in the right ways. I mean, they've done it in the past. They've put together decent rosters that haven't been able to get the job done. But, I mean, what do you
Yeah.
think? You think he might have just said this to kind of blow it over and make teams less likely to make a move for him that he might not necessarily want to go play for?
I don't think it's an unreasonable assumption to think that that might be the case because, I mean, I guess you'll see if his agent gets fired because he might have said that just like, oh man, like I'd really like to just get an extension and get in my bag. Because if you look at it, like, what I said before, he also could have found a home there. He could love it there and not want to go unless he knows he's going to be able to get settled in before he has to pack his bags again. It could be that too. But in terms of, him trying to control his value, I think that he really has had a hard time getting healthy, and he's finally healthy. So I think that he's kind of feeling himself a little bit, and he wants to make sure that he makes the right move for his career, which can be respected. But if you see the agent go, then you know that it was something that he wanted to get moved at that point. But I don't think that'll be the case. I think that you could definitely look at that where he wants to make sure he's a starter because I think that also you have more preparation, more expectation on when you're pitching, and he's shown he can do it. So if he could sit there in the offseason and say, all right, like these teams need a starter, they need me, and I want to be there. I think they could win a World Series. So that's very possible. But also, I feel like a lot of players, even though like it might not seem like it sometimes, they try to do right by the organization that gave them a shot. I mean, if you're a first round pick, like you're ready to get a shot no matter what. But I still think there's in all the sports, there's a lot of integrity that comes to it. Even if when you get your next contract, you leave, like a lot of like the NBA sign and trades, for example, stuff like that. You don't really see that in baseball, but I think that you kind of see them like throw a ball into their other team or they get a pick.
Deadline has passed. We are no longer going to see any more trades happening for this season. So, I mean, these rosters are set. We're ready for playoff baseball coming up next. But you said a really big word, right? Integrity. And that's kind of what we want to also get into in terms of the sports world. Integrity is a really important thing. But unfortunately, a lot of times we don't see that playing out depending on where it is. Is it coaching or is it the front office? Is it a player? One in particular that's recently come to fruition is what's happened in the Olympics, specifically with the Canadian soccer teams, not only the men's, but the women's. They've been penalized 6 points for using drones to spy on other teams. This is something that is just unacceptable in the sports world. We can't allow for things like this to happen. They tried appealing it to the Olympics and the committees, and it was dismissed almost immediately. Now it seems like they're trying to hire another attorney to open up another case. But I mean, it seems
Mhm.
pretty clear cut here. When you cheat, you should be penalized and probably banned from the sport. I mean, this is unacceptable. If things like this happened on a constant basis, why would we be watching sports, right? Fans do not want cheating. We don't want to see coaches try to get a leg up by using a drone or using a smaller football, for instance, right, to try to get things to go your way. This is just not something that we should be talking about today on this podcast. It should never
Mhm.
happen, but the fact that it has happened is something that we need to discuss. It's unacceptable.
Well, I think that you look at it where just 2 weeks ago we were talking about how impressed we were at their finals. Excuse me, their finish in the Euros. So now that puts a cloud over that. Were they doing it then? Maybe they just got caught now because everyone's all together. You don't really know, and it kind of just a country that was so ready to take that next step now for a very long time is going to be questioned on the legitimacy of their rise. And I think that it's a very important thing to have integrity in sports because a lot of people look for consistency in their vices, whether it be like movies, whether it be sports, whatever. A movie obviously is a movie. It could be fact or fiction, and it's the script. But sports, you don't want a script. You want the mystery is the beauty of the game in every sport. You don't know what's going to happen. The little guy could beat the big guy anytime. I mean, a lot of times it's not likely, but when you look at it, you want to see a fair game. Like you don't want the officials doing anything, which that's not the case in this point. But just you look at the umpires as regulating it, but then when it comes to practice, that's kind of a sacred ground. Like all these places, like I know the Giants, your favorite football team, have a barbed wire around their fence. Like that's just an example of how protected they are their what they're practicing, what they're doing, what they're trying to accomplish, what they're trying to achieve on a day-to-day basis. And I think that for that to be broken, I think that that's something that is really sad for the sports world. And then honestly, like you really have to you look at who they played and who beat them. Like you're like, okay, if you beat them, were you doing the same thing? I mean, that's kind of dramatic, but like you got to look at it. It really puts a lot into doubt, and I feel like the Olympics as a whole has kind of like maybe it's maybe it's because of like America being the way it is with certain things with patriotism, but also the fact that I just think the games are just not the same energy as they once were. But like I feel like people love the World Cup more than the Olympics, which it's not crazy because soccer's pretty dope. But I think that that's something that has to be looked at, and they have to not accept that because it seems like they just got past the fact that they were taking bribes for locations, like that people stopped like mentioning that, but now you're gonna have this over your head,
I mean, this
and
isn't
they
the
got
first time we've seen this in forget about just the world aspect of things being in the Olympics. Obviously, this is such a big scale, but we've seen this domestically in the United States. Going back to what you said about the Giants putting this barbed wire around their facilities and their organization to protect themselves. When you have scenarios like Deflate Gate and SpyGate that happened with the Patriots, and we don't really even bash them. Yeah, they've gotten their penalties, but because they were such a dynasty and Tom Brady, Bill Belichick, that you kind of don't really emphasize on what happened there, right? Those were pretty big things to happen, and spying on other teams to see if you could steal their play codes, their playbooks, or potentially, deflating the ball for, obvious reasons, whether you're working with a smaller ball, try to give you an edge on the game, on a Super Bowl, on a playoff game. It's unacceptable, right? Going down the line, 2017, Houston Astros. I mean, the banging on the trash cans and sign stealing. These things have happened in American sports, but there's no place for it. And I feel like the penalties that they've gotten, yes, the Astros did get a harsh penalty, but I don't think it was harsh enough, right? AJ Hinch 1 year was suspended and they got a $5 million fine. They didn't get stripped of a World Series. The Patriots did
they
not.
didn't touch the players. They didn't touch the players either in Houston.
No,
Like
except for the fact that they got Carlos Beltran on some stuff, but that wasn't even him getting penalized. It was the Mets when they hired him to be their manager, and then all this stuff came out. They said, you know what, we decide we're not going to give you this opportunity because this is some bad rapport on you, and we don't want to have this be our manager for the New York Mets, right? But other than that, I mean, these things are just not acceptable when we're fans, we're watching, we're putting in our hard-earned money to go to a game or watch it on TV and buy a jersey. For us to get cheated out is unacceptable. You're not just cheating out the other organization, the other team that you're playing, right? It's super selfish move, but you're cheating out tons and tons of people, right? Nowadays, sports betting is a huge thing. People have money on the line, and you're telling
yeah,
me that you're going to make these adjustments, right? And I mean, going to the betting factor, right? Another thing was Pete Rose back in the 70s, he was betting, but the only difference with him was, obviously he was known to be a notorious liar for a lot of things that he said, but he said he bet on Cincinnati Reds baseball. And I don't doubt that because if you know who Pete Rose is, he was all about winning, right? He never wanted to lose. He would never throw a game because for him, even just getting an extra total base, going from first to second or second to third was such a big thing, right? He's the all-time hits leader, not in Cooperstown, but compared to the other scandals that we've seen, right, nowadays, betting is so much more acceptable. I'm not saying athletes should be betting on their specific sports or sports in general, but what I'm saying is that compared to what we've seen, going from Canada and what we're seeing with these drones to the Patriots, to the Astros, to Pete Rose, I mean, this is kind of just like not what we are supposed to be seeing as fans. And
yeah, I
the
think that
world, it makes it a lot worse of a place in terms of the sporting world. It gives it a bad rapport. And I mean, kids who are learning to become fans of the sport, if you have parents who are like, well, look at all this trouble that's happening, they might say, well, I don't want my child to get into this whole entire aspect of things because there's a lot going on that's just obviously to be determined. We don't know exactly how they plan on making these an impossibility for them to be able to cheat because there's no way, right? You can't just stop everything and say, well, you can't do this, can't do that, because it obviously has opportunities for other things to happen. And it's so sad when these things happen, especially in the Olympics and cheaters
yeah.
from
I mean, when you
coaching.
talk about the betting, when you talk about the stuff like that, You don't want to think that there's someone outside of the people on the field controlling what's going on the field for their personal gain. You don't want anything like that. I wanted to touch on Jonte Porter. I mean, I know Michael Porter Jr. is one of my favorite players in the league, but his brother's up to no good. And it's something that's really important that the courts did, that they did not allow him to go to Greece to continue playing, because it sets the precedent where if someone gets caught here betting on themselves, he was betting on his unders and faking injuries and or taking himself out of games. And now he tried to go play in Greece and just continue, take his bag and run. And they're like, you can't leave the country. What are you doing? You broke the law, and you have to face it. You can't just run. So many people work their lives off to get there, and he worked his life off too, but he was not grateful for the opportunity. And there's so many people that would have been. I think that that's something that you cannot have under any circumstance. That would very quickly deteriorate a league if people see that players are doing this. Like this one, it's not a big time player, but I mean, then you shift to like Otani, where his interpreter, everyone's saying that he was doing bets, and a lot of people like I think it was David Fletcher, who actually is pitching in AAA now. That's something we'll talk about another time. Was with the bookmaker too, and he's still playing in AAA. So, but this guy Ippy is going to get a lot of jail time for lots of millions of dollars that Otani claims he never knew anything about. Which, I mean, you can't do anything but let them do their discussion. But I mean, I know we haven't heard about it recently, but I wanted to hear what you thought about the Otani scandal.
I mean, poor guy had to go through so much crap for that, right? I mean, good thing for him is that the MLB did their investigation, the FBI did their investigation, and they determined that he had no real involvement in this other than the fact that he was getting robbed, right? I mean, his interpreter was literally transferring money, calling the bank, saying, I'm Shohei Otani, transfer money. You know what I find kind of interesting too, right? If you're the interpreter and the person you're interpreting for doesn't speak English, if I'm the bank, right? And I'm like, wait, Shohei Otani? I thought you don't speak English. How are you calling me right now, making a wire happen, right? That's just this little side thing. I'm glad that at least that's past us. That's something specific for an interpreter, that he's going away. There's no way around it. He is done for. He's never going to get another opportunity to have a chance to make all this money. I mean, he was making hundreds of thousands of dollars as an interpreter, and now he's going to be sitting in jail, rotting away for probably a very long time, right? And going back to Jonte Porter, not a good basketball player, played for the Toronto Raptors. He never deserves to be in the NBA ever again. I mean, I get it. You're making $500,000. You're like, how else am I going to make some more money? Well, I'll tell you right now, it's not by betting on yourself and the unders. That's horrendous, right? Like, oh, my over-under for steals per game is half. Well, I'm not going to play defense now. Horrible, right? Not only for the whole scope of the NBA, but for Toronto Raptors fans too, right? Who they want to see you go hustle and win games. And, you're out there dilly-dallying and not caring because you know that when you don't do the things that the over-under are telling you, or at least you are not good enough to, make stats happen, then this is what happens, and you get paid from betting. It's unacceptable, right? These people should not be capitalizing. I'm not looking to condone, also going back to Pete Rose, I'm not looking to condone what he did, right? I mean, what he did was for the purposes of kind of doubling down on his team. And now there's this whole HBO Max documentary on what he has been kind of going through, and kind of trying to get back into the Hall of Fame and back into the baseball world. So, I think being the all-time hits leader and clearing up the fact that he did deny it for a long time and then finally admitted to it, and MLB still said we're not going to let you in. Guy's 81 years old. You know what the worst part is? They're going to put him into the Hall of Fame. Whether or not he's alive to see it or dead to see it, that's to be determined, right? I think, the MLB probably has it in the back of their head. All right, whenever he kicks rocks and is, 5-6 feet under, we'll put him into the Hall of Fame. He'll never see it, though. And that's sad, right? I think, sometimes you have to give a little exception when they admit to it, and, considering that he is one of the best players to ever play baseball and not to be in the Hall of Fame, right? It's not like we're looking at it like 4,256 hits is, has an asterisk next to it. He didn't take steroids, right? He didn't cheat it to get to that number. He got there, right? It's not like he was, I'm not going to swing as hard because my over under was 1.5 hits or half a hit, and I don't want to get that hit. So, it's exception based on the rule. I'm not condoning it. It should never be allowed. If you're an athlete, you're making hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars, not only from playing, but also in endorsements and advertisement. Seems like instead of trying to go make more money betting on yourself, you probably need a better financial advisor and securing yourself for the future.
Yeah, you're not wrong about that. I think that even then, but let alone now, the money is so big that I I could see these people just throwing money around for no reason, just to do it, just to try and double up, and then otherwise, all right, next year, like even like the mid-level players in the NBA, like they'll be like, all right, like I'll throw a million on the Cowboys to win the Super Bowl. All right, no, all good, no worries. I'm gonna make 20 million next year. That's nothing.
It's sad, but I mean, in terms of betting, this is so big now today in 2024. There's a lot of people who like to bet, and they try to get a tail up. Whether it's trying to be as sharp as possible, looking at the odds, following the lines, all those things, right? And
Hmm.
speaking on betting, right, the odds-on favorite and for the men's basketball for collegiate is none other than the University of Connecticut, the Huskies. They are odds-on favorite to win it all again, and that would be a three-peat. They've won the last two. They did bring back Dan Hurley as their head coach. He took less money, and this is something, right? He took less money instead of going to the Lakers to be the Lakers head coach in the NBA. He said, I'd rather go back to UConn, take like $20 million less, and coach there and create a legacy for himself in that program in college basketball. And he's still young. He could still make himself into the NBA eventually. But what do you think about them? I think at this moment they're plus 900 to win it all and make it a three-peat. The second team in history of college basketball to do a three-peat. That was the UCLA Bruins back in the 60s and 70s. They actually won seven in a row.
Yeah, I mean, when I looked at it last when we decided on this topic, I actually shout out to Away, by the way, for the question about if we think UConn can do it. With Dan Hurley there, anything's possible. But when I saw the odds, it was Duke, Kansas, and UConn all at plus 1,000. If you see plus 900, then people are feeling them to do it. I mean, it's hard to bet against them. I mean, you look at it, they brought in Aiden Mahaney from St. Mary's, a very defensive-minded school. They have Hassan Diarra. They did lose a lot of guys. So personally, I wouldn't say that they're the team that I think is going to win it, because I think that Klingon was so important, and I think that a lot of things are a lot of moving pieces. Like I think they might need a year before they get it back, and maybe for 25, 26 to consider them. But I mean, I'm not going to put money against them. But what do you think?
Well, here's the thing, right? You pointed out a good point. These players, they leave, whether they're transferring or they graduate or they're ready for the NBA draft. In college, players turn around a lot more than in the NBA do. So that's why making it a three-peat is extremely difficult. Now, one thing to also state is that a lot of the top recruits haven't committed yet. So we're going to see whether these players end up going to UConn or other big programs. But, Duke is always up there. Alabama's also up there. Houston is up there. Kansas is, in my opinion, the best odds-on favorite to win. I shouldn't say odds-on favorite because technically they're like in the same ballpark. But
Yeah,
if I had
I
to
know what
pick
you
a
mean.
team right now, I would take Kansas. There's a lot of pressure, right, on UConn to consider making this three-peat. I mean, going back to UCLA, they were so dominant in the late 60s and the early 70s. Not only did they win seven in a row under the John Wooden era, but they also won 9 out of 10, right? So, I mean, we haven't seen that since, I think it was like 73 or 74, something like that, where they won their last one. Maybe it was also in the mid-70s. I'm not 100% sure. But, it's been 50 years since we've seen a three-peat in the college basketball world, while in the NBA, we saw the Lakers do that in the early 2000s, right? They did a three-peat. Warriors won 3 out of 4, which is incredible, but, it's not a three-peat. So it just shows
Mhm.
you that it's a lot more probable to happen. Not that I shouldn't say probable, possible to happen. A three-peat is very difficult in any sport, in college and the professional level. It doesn't really matter. But UConn is a great team. They have a great head coach. I don't see why they won't be at least making a deep run into it. I know that some guys will be leaving and some guys are getting ready for the NBA draft. But the truth is, UConn is such a great program. They've always been a really great program in the Big East over there. So I expect them to make some big noise.
Yeah, I mean, they do have the number 9 prospect projected to be in their starting lineup, which is a great thing, but that also shows how bare bones they are compared to last year, that they could potentially be starting a freshman. I mean, don't get me wrong, to be a top 10 recruit, you got to be good at basketball, but still, my team that I think you mentioned a lot of great teams, Houston and Alabama were the two that I think that could take the throne for them. I think Alabama is that team. I think last year they had a problem with some games they would let get out of hand defensively, and then they'd either be behind or they would just be going bucket for bucket and be exhausted for defense. I think that overall they brought in Cliff Omiuri from Rutgers, who I think is a great shot blocker and someone who can make an impact inside with Grant Nelson. And I think that they are a team that I know preseason they're looking at these early rankings. They're number 2 behind Kansas that you said, UConn number 3. I think that for good reason, those teams are the projected top 3. I'd be going with Alabama. I mean, like I said, I would not bet against Dan Hurley with actual money, but you'll be seeing Alabama on my bracket unless you see some injuries.
I feel like the last few years you've given a lot of support for Alabama, and I don't blame you, right? I'm actually a big fan of them too. Colin Sexton came out of there. I'm a big fan of Colin Sexton, and when he played 5-on-3 basketball back in 2017, I think it was. I mean, that's crazy, and he kind of like tore it up, right? They were in that game. I mean, this is so long ago, but I'm just kind of reminiscing back on that. I mean, it was
I do remember that.
5-on-3, and Colin Sexton was raking against 5 other players. It was incredible. But we'll see, right? Alabama's a great team. Duke is up there too, but now no longer Mike Krzyzewski coaching, so I think that definitely makes a lot of changes happen amongst the organization and recruitment process. So, there's going to be a lot of fun stuff. We're excited for college basketball. When it does get closer, we're going to bring you guys a lot more. There's still a lot big recruits out there that still haven't committed just yet. So we still have a lot more college basketball to discuss now that, there's a lot less things to go over. And I mean, we want to hear our fans also kind of give us some intel on what they think is going to be happening in terms of the college basketball world. I mean,
You have any sleepers in mind?
if I had to pick a sleeper, Houston's not really a
Championship sleeper.
sleeper.
Yeah.
They're not a sleeper, but in terms of obviously winning, it's been a while for them to have a national championship. But I'm excited, right? We get to March, we get to the end of March, and those brackets start forming. And even people who aren't really big in terms of sports fans or even just college basketball fans, they're filling out brackets, right? Because they want to
Yeah.
see if they could win that. I don't know if they still do that, $1 million prize bag if you get
It's
like
a
the perfect.
billion.
It's
It's a
$1
billion.
billion. Who's paying that? Warren Buffett?
Yes, literally it is.
Wow. I have to give myself some props for that because I just pulled a name out of my, you know what? Are you confident it's Warren Buffett?
Yes, and I mean, there's pretty much only one of 3 people that would be able to do that, so it's not really that
That's true.
surprising.
It's like Warren
But
Buffett, Jeff Bezos, and like Bill Gates, right?
literally, that's it. And
maybe
for
Elon
me,
Musk too, right? He bought X
yeah,
for
that's true.
$45 billion, so he might have a couple
Yeah,
billion to spare here and there.
but I think that a sleeper could be if Rutgers can get their chemistry going because they got a lot of transfers, they have 2 of the top 3 projected picks for the 2025 draft. If they could all mesh, they could be really dangerous in the Big Ten because they'll be battle tested going through the whole year. I think when the tournament comes around, I think that's a team that could really make some noise.
The Scarlet Knights. Wow, that's a bold statement, I'd have to say. I mean, if they make it far, Ben, I want you to clip that just so that we have that under surveillance, so that when they do get close enough, at least Josh can say, "Look, I told you so." Or if they get blown out and they don't even make the bracket, I could say, "Hey, Josh, your Rutgers not looking so good."
Yeah, I mean it's a sleeper pick. I'd say if you have an Alabama Rutgers final, then you'll have a happy me. Like that's my sleeper team versus my team that I think will win it. That'd be cool to be right about one of them.
What do you think about like a team like Baylor?
Baylor's pretty cool. I like the way they play. It just seems like they can't really keep their players. I feel like they're always going somewhere else, and I think that they're always a team that can make some noise. But I feel like within their conference, it's just so tough, and I feel like they're never really doing it like that. But they do have the number 3 prospect. They did get Jeremy Roach from Duke. I think that having Jeremy Roach might help him take his game to the next level because I feel like sometimes being like at a Duke could be like being at one of these big name professional teams where you might hold yourself back because honestly, not for any particular reason, just saying like I'm at Duke, like I'm just gonna try and be a part of the team to win the championship. But I think that they can make some noise. I mean, they've had their troubles in the tournament, but I do think that Scott Drew is a great coach. Shout out to his brother who coaches Grand Canyon too. I'm a big fan of that program and watching the party that ensues before the game. I got to go there.
Well, we're going to have a lot of good stuff to go over in terms of basketball, college football. We're going to bring you guys a lot of cool stuff in the future about this. Now, we never, ever, ever stop without a yogiism, right? So, before we get to our yogiisms, I got to thank you all. Thank you all to my fans. Thank you all to our fans for watching, subscribing, liking,
No, just Harry's
commenting.
fans.
Nah,
Harry's
just
just thinking. Harry's just thinking Harry's
my,
fans.
my, my fans are not nearly on a different level than your fans are. We're all on the same level here. We have a lot of great people that have been starting to follow us, and we're really appreciative of it. Just being here in the studio, working with Ben, you on the other end, it's such a blast, right? I mean, we have so much fun doing this, and I love bringing you guys all this content, and we're gonna bring you some great stuff in the near future. We got some great things cooking over here at Beyond the Score podcast. Please don't forget to tag us in any post that you guys have, comment away, like us, subscribe us, Apple Music, Spotify, whatever you guys listen to, and don't forget, if we're crazy, let us know, because we are crazy, but we want to hear it from you guys. We want you guys to let us know if we got the craziest takes or we got the best takes, whatever it is. We want to hear it. We want to bring you on here too, if you guys would be open to that and maybe work something out, have you guys join us in studio, have a conversation about something specific. We're open to anything, right? We want to get this done. Josh, I mean, I love it. I love working with you. I love working with Ben. I love being at the Podcast Junkie studio over here. It truly is such a surreal experience.
Yeah, man, I couldn't agree more. I think that I want to tell a little story that when I came down to Florida, because we could have started this a couple months before, but Harry wanted me to meet Ben, and I mean for good reason. I feel like meeting Ben and it's a very positive thing that I've never met someone so passionate about podcasting that had so much information about it. And I think that really showed me that not being having him on our side is someone that knows what it takes to do it right, and be just that someone who really cares about what they're doing and is going to make sure that if we're doing something that we can improve at, that we're going to get better. So I think that's something really important to thank him for. And I also thank our fans. I was just messing with Harry. We got the same fans, and I really want to every time we hit a new 200 followers on Instagram, we're going to give away a shirt, a hat, something. It'll be a different thing every time, but we'll cycle it. So like the shirt might come back, or maybe we'll make like new shirts. Maybe if Harry says something silly, or if we got one of those cool yogiisms, we'll put it on a shirt and we'll give it away. And we're gonna have some merch out there as well.
I say a lot of silly things. I do. I have to admit that.
Yeah, so I just really appreciate being able to be here. Working with you, Harry, is amazing, and I'm so grateful for it. And I'm grateful for everyone that listens and the messages I get, the comments we get. Like, you don't realize, like, if we get a couple comments, like, we're happy. We love to see that. We text each other and we're like, this is so awesome. We love to be able to provide this for people that really love it and really care about it. And so keep doing what you're doing. Tell a friend. When we get to those
or an enemy
remarks,
or an enemy, we're not biased towards anyone.
As long as they like sports, you're not wrong about that. See, there's a silly thing right there.
Well, they don't even have to like sports, but we'll get them to like sports if they start watching. Maybe they'll be like, whoa, these guys are legitimate. Like, I start liking sports. Actually, it's funny because I've had family friends who've said that. I don't mean to cut you off while you're saying this, but people are like, I don't even really know sports, but I'll watch, and like they're like, oh, I picked up on this, and I'm like, oh, I love it. That's what we love too, right? People who don't know sports who are like now learning a lot about it from us.
Yeah, I mean, I want to try and make sure that we stay like every man, like that we're talking to everybody, that we want you to feel like you're like we're in the living room on the couch talking and you're in the other room, that you feel like you could chime in. Like we don't want to ever feel like you have to back down, even if you disagree. We find it really important to have that engagement and have you, because honestly, like without our listeners, we really aren't doing anything. I mean, it's fun, but like those comments just take it to the next level. And if you see Harry in the street, say what's up. He'll make his day.
I will. I'm not going to say I'm going to cry, but I'd be giddy, very giddy, if someone came up to me and said, "Oh my God, are you from Beyond the Score podcast? You're getting an autograph and some merchandise." Yeah. But what you've all been waiting for, finally, to the yogiisms that we've known to see on a weekly basis here at Beyond the Score podcast. Don't forget, no stranger danger, right? If you have an anonymous letter, never answer an anonymous letter. That's coming from your greatest catcher of all time, Yogi Berra. Thank you guys again so much for tuning in on our podcast. We're going to be back next week bringing you guys some new stuff.